Wait a few seconds till the recording is started, of course. Okay, welcome everybody at the Frontend Lightning Talks. We are once again here with an amazing presenters. In that case, this is our last and final session of the year, which is sad, of course, but next year we're back again with a full program, so we will enjoy that again. This time we also have some very cool gifts for you, but you will see that later. Well, what we want to do with the program is inspire and have an informative, but most importantly, an informal session as well. So we are just colleagues, devs, fellow devs from different expertises, which just like to share the knowledge with each other. And the program is as follows. First, we'll do a small introduction. Hence, you're currently in the small introduction. We'll continue it in a few seconds. Then we have Micha with the Blazor talk, uniting frontend, backend, and cloud. Because, of course, we're talking about cloud and security and the relationship between frontend. So I think every frontender will learn something from it. Then we have frontend security in DevSecOps from Bram. Afterwards, we have the enhancing frontend performance with Azure CDN. So 3 completely different topics, but all related with frontend in some way. And in the end, it's possible to unmute yourself. Also, during the presentation or after the presentations, you have the possibility to unmute yourself and ask the questions directly, or in the chat. That's also possible. We have a few moderators in the back who will also answer and help you with some questions or send links. Feel free to give some feedback as well. If the audio isn't good, mention it, and then we'll help each other out. Without further ado, the presenters today, indeed, Micha will talk about the first one, then Bram, and then Jordy. That's the order we're going to talk about. Well, as I mentioned, we're fellow devs. Society is a big company. This is not a recruitment talk. We don't like that. We're developers. I think we got enough messages in our inboxes, so let's not talk about it. But we're a company who like technology, who loves technology. It's our passion, actually. We want to share it. That's why we're doing these sessions. Also, from security till cloud, till front end, till back end. Every expertise you can find in here, and also for all the big companies you can name within the Netherlands. We're located there. So we make technology work with each other. That's our slogan. But no recruitment talk. One thing I want to mention, we're a community partner of Romania, the Frontend Lightning Talks. Romania is an NL-based frontend conference. And we have a small gift for you guys because we have some must-see sessions of Jordy Verlaek, which will talk about supercharge your productivity, mastering prompt engineering, which is going to talk about, well, prompt engineering, AI, the magic everyone uses. And Kerkhof will talk about the holistic approach to sustainable IT. And Micha Nijenhof will talk about the accessibility, the voice UI, let your users do the talking. And for everybody in this call, you can use the Society Frontend Community gift code. We will send a link afterwards where you can buy the ticket with 25% off. And more importantly, there will also be, small surprise, some tickets to give away for free entirely. So be aware during the session. Well, if you ain't hyped already, I don't know anymore. Because Micha, you're going to talk about Blazor. And I think we can all give you a big applause. Hopefully it sounds okay. All the questions can be put in the chat. Micha will share a screen. And then we'll give the floor to Micha.
All right. So Blazor, uniting frontend, backend, and cloud. Quite a big statement, of course, to make. And it probably immediately, brings up some questions. What even is Blazor? Well, that's one of the things we're answering today in this session. And additionally, we're also going to talk about why you should use Blazor and when to use Blazor. We're going to do that by going through some of the pros and cons of Blazor and show you a bit of how to use it as well, of course. Practical stuff, that's fun stuff. Before that, quick thing about me. My name is Micha Nijenhof. I'm a full-stack Microsoft developer here at Society. I've been here for about a year, and in that time, I've mostly worked for PostNL. Before that, I worked at a company called Kotman. There I also worked as a full-stack Microsoft developer, and I did pretty much exclusively things with Blazor. So that's where I got my knowledge from it, and where I fell in love with Blazor. So that brings us to what is Blazor? Well, to put it frankly, it's a front-end framework, very similar to things like Angular, React, and Vue. And with that, I immediately have a question for all our viewers. So what's your favorite front-end framework? Or if you don't have one, I also accept your most hated one. We all have that one at least. So yeah, let's see in the chat. What's the favorite one?
Yeah, please put it in the chat indeed. Personally, at my company where I work, we use web components, so that's not in the big three. But I know Angular, React, and Vue are the big ones. I see here on Vue already.
We don't know if it's his favorite or the worst one.
No, I'm not mentioning anything about the worst one. If you say Angular, then React people will be angry, and the other way around as well. So lots of responses.
I
Nice.
see at least one mention of Blazor, so that's already.
React, Angular, Blazor, Vue.
In that case, we're just going to continue, and I'll take Angular as an example for most of my comparisons. Which brings us a bit more to what even is Blazor. So like I mentioned, it's a front-end framework. It's component-based, and it's for single-page applications. So in that sense, similar to Angular, React, etc. It differs, however, in how you use it. It's all C# based, so instead of writing TypeScript or JavaScript, you're writing C# code. And you're using Razor syntax for your templating engine. It also has multiple hosting options, which are very important to understand if you want to understand the pros and cons of Blazor, which is what we'll be starting with real quick. So the first one will be server-side. If you're using server-side Blazor, your clients, your users get a very small application that only really connects with a session on server. That server then renders all of your front end and communicates it through SignalR, which is basically WebSockets, to your client. The client interacts with that, and every action the user takes is communicated back to the server, and thus you have your web page. Now it offers some big pros. One being fast load times. You don't really need to transfer much in terms of data, other than what's actually being shown. So it's very fast, at least on the initial load time. It uses a lot of server capabilities, or you have the opportunity to use a lot of server capabilities. So should you want to do some more intensive processing, that's an opportunity you have as well. It has excellent legacy support. So God forbid, if you have a lot of Internet Explorer users, it's quite good for that as well, seeing as everything is being rendered on the server and you don't really need to pay attention that much to what your user is using. And it has a lot of security benefits, as no data really leaves the server. So yeah, the only interaction point is the front end. Later on, we'll have a bit more about security by Bram, but that's later, so definitely stick around for that. Now, of course, server-side also has some cons, the biggest one being network dependency. If you have a network that's very unstable, Blazor server-side is going to be a very unpleasant experience for your users. And it's also quite difficult if you have users across the globe and want to deploy quickly, seeing as sessions get disconnected. So it's not the best for that. Additionally, you need more server resources because everything is being rendered on the server. So that's a bit of a con as well. And then there's also a separation of concern issue that we'll discuss a bit more in depth later on. But it basically has to do with well, the connections you can lay between different Blazor components and C# projects. And that's something to pay attention to as well, but more about that later. And that brings us to the second hosting option that Blazor has, client-side. Client-side is much more comparable to, well, what probably everyone does most of the time these days. If you have, for example, an Angular application that gets completely downloaded to the user device and is then on the user's device cached. And Blazor works pretty much the same, except instead of compiling to JavaScript code, it compiles to WebAssembly. Now, some pros of that: you need limited network connectivity after the application has been transferred to the user device, except, of course, for making API requests. You're using client resources, so no, or well, less cost when it comes to your resources that you expand. And of course, it's also quite fast as it uses WebAssembly instead of just JavaScript. Now, that's not always faster, but in a lot of cases it can be. Some cons: you need WebAssembly browser support. So again, God forbid you have Internet Explorer users. Those are not going to have a good time or any time with the WebAssembly application. And it also, another big con, some longer load times, seeing as, well, the application needs to be transferred and it includes some .NET code that also needs transferring. So that increases the load time a bit. Now, that's enough talk for now about a boring PowerPoint. So let's go to a quick demo that I have right here. So this is just a simple Blazor application. In it, we have three projects. The first one being a very simple API that if I open it real quick, just shows some weather forecasts. Very simple, not really worth talking about more than it's a web API, I call it. Which brings us to the more important and interesting part, the Blazor app. This is quite a short session to explain what everything in Blazor is, so I'm not even going to try to do that. I am, however, going to show you what, well, a component looks like in Blazor and how you use it. So let's open one of the pages, the most interesting one, of course, which is fetch data. And in it, we immediately see a couple of things. Well, first one, page indication. So that's a bit of routing to say, well, at which URL this is. We then have a very special color here, HTML tag, that basically indicates that that is a component that is being rendered. And if we move on down from there, we can see the Razor templating at work. So Razor templating, in my opinion, is a very elegant way of doing stuff like this. Simply an add if and then a statement you need, some curly brackets, just like you do when you're scripting other logic, with some HTML in between as to what to render when it's being executed. The else, exactly the same. And if we scroll down, the for each is again very similar to what we already know in scripting. And also shows here that it's very easy to, well, just put a at before the text and it recognizes it as something it can replace. So no more things like these brackets, Razor templating handles all of that. Now there is of course also some additional logic in this class, because where are we getting the forecasts from? That brings us to our quick code behind file. And in it, we have a couple of different things that, if you know C# might look a bit weird. One being the inject annotation. So that basically shows how to use dependency injection in a Blazor application. And you have access to the full dependency injection that C# offers. So that's really powerful and very flexible with all the different things you might want to do. Well, then we have a forecast object, the basic array that contains the forecasts that are being rendered, and then a special uninitialized async method that basically sends a request to our API, fetches some data, converts it, and shows it. Now, that object that is being fetched here is actually present in our third project, our Blazor example shared. Now, this is basically a class library of sorts that contains all the models that you might want to have between your front and backend. And it's very easy like that to, well, define contracts between your backend and front end without needing to, well, have a lot of discussion about what the object looks like afterwards. So it prevents a lot of issues that way. If we start it, quickly go into build. Starts with our Swagger page for the API and then our Blazor app. Well, our app, in this case, we went to fetch data. So it loads some data. I added the task delay, so that's why.
Blazor says, etc., and then loading.
And that just shows the page, really. Now, if we get back to the home page real quick, we can also see that this has a survey thingy. And if we look at that in code, we can also see how a component is being used. So we have our survey prompt. In this case, the code is in the file here. And really just a parameter to indicate that this is something that can be passed to this component. And then if we go to our index page, you can see it here being used like this. And this already has data binding in it, so no need to do additional setup that way either. Just works really. And with that, the demo is concluded, but not the rest of the presentation, of course. Which brings us to some of the general benefits of Blazor. One of the big ones is that a Blazor application can be very cohesive. So what I showed you with linking the solutions allows for a very, well, singular solution that you can navigate with clicking through it really easily. However, there's also a big con if you're not careful. And that's if you're linking the projects together improperly, then you can get a very tightly coupled application, and you really don't want that. So for example, if your app were to directly reference your API project, those files would be included in building it as well, and then transferred to the user. So that's not something you want at all. Second benefit is that it's one language, so it really only uses C#, which means you only need to learn one language to do both frontend and backend. And it also offers you the full capabilities of the NuGet package manager to both make your own packages and use existing ones, and there are quite many. I do say that it only uses C#, but that's not really true. You can also still use JavaScript through something called JavaScript interrupt. And if you do that, then you can still install all your favorite JavaScript packages through npm.
Oh, thankful.
One big one, of course, being Chart.js, which is not the perfect example because that already has a Blazor port. But if those are the things you're worried about not being able to use that, then you don't have to worry about that. Now, the other one being one team. So if you're using Blazor, your team is much more one whole team because you're only using one language. And that makes it for a lot easier transitioning between frontend and backend. And that means if you have a lot of backend developers, you can have them do some frontend tasks without having them needing to learn an entire new language. And the same goes for frontenders taking up backend tasks. And well, for full stack developers, it's of course business as usual. Really. It also adds a bit of a learning degree because if you want to learn some more things about backend, for example, then as a front-end developer using Blazor, it's much easier to transition to those tasks again as well. Now, another one being one platform. All of this is Microsoft technology, which I suppose can be both a pro and a con, depending on where you stand. But it's very easy to integrate with Azure. There are a lot of articles all over the internet about how to use it. There's a couple of different pre-baked templates as well. So really easy to deploy and configure that way. And it also integrates very nicely with things like Azure SignalR, Azure Functions, Azure App Service, or Azure CDN, which Jordy will mention.
It was nice.
So again, just C#, so NuGet packages. So if you want to integrate with those from Azure, then you can do that as well. And also, it can be used on many devices. Now, these days, .NET Code runs on multiple platforms. You don't want to have issues with using it on Linux, like you might have had in the past. That's not what I'm talking about here, though, because you can actually use Blazor on mobile devices as well. So another thing in the image on the right that you might have noticed is the Blazor example native project. I'm not going to go too much in depth about that, a bit too much for this session. But Microsoft had another technology called .NET MAUI. And with that, you can use Blazor components in native apps. So you can build iOS apps, Android apps as well with your existing components. So that's, again, could be an entire session on its own, but just to be aware of that technology also exists. Now, then a general downside, it has a smaller community. It's already grown quite a bit since when I started with Blazor, but it's not as big as something like Angular or React. So it is growing, but it's still smaller than Angular or React.
Not everybody said Blazor when you talked about the framework, sadly.
Yeah, exactly. So there's still room to grow. This we already discussed, so we can skip right past this one. And then there are also some couple of links that I have. I'll send them in the chat afterwards, so you can take a look at them if you want to learn more about Blazor. And with that, this session is concluded. And I want to ask all of you if you have any more questions about Blazor, just put them in the chat or open your mic if you want to.
Chat is first fine indeed. First of all, thank you, Micha. Well done. Everybody in chat can also do like some reactions within Teams. It's also nice. And indeed, there is a question too from Leo, one of the guests. Are there rough numbers available for the difference in cost regarding the server resources? I think that is when you asked about server-side rendering and client-side rendering.
Yeah, not really. First of all, if you do host a WebAssembly client, you still need static file storage to serve it from. So that already complicates it a little bit. And the biggest cost driver with Blazor server-side is if you have users across multiple continents, because then you need to pay account to where your users are located and make sure they have a stable connection with the server. So that would drive it up quite a bit. If I were to estimate myself, and that's purely just a guess, I would say it's about 50% more expensive ish, and that's just on assuming that you have some proper static file storage and then also proper hosting for your server. That doesn't spread multiple continents or anything like that. That drives the cost up quite a lot.
Yeah, I think Jordy will also talk about CDN right in the street, as we say in Dutch. Okay, there are no other questions, but I have a question as well. When we're looking at Blazor as a technology, where you see everybody responded to React and review. In 2-3 years, what do you think will happen to Blazor?
Well, I think it's being adopted quite a bit more nowadays. It's difficult to see what technologies companies are sometimes using, but you can see big companies like Canon or Rodipers, for example, using it. In Access, Leander, if you look at their job offers, for example, they also
request specifically Blazor.
Blazor, so that indicates to me that it's being used more and more by large organizations as well. So I think it's really has a spot amongst the big ones in a few years, especially because it's backed by Microsoft, so it's not going to just
No, that's quite important indeed. Well, maybe next time I'll learn Blazor and my hobby project, and maybe for the client as well.
Community is growing.
Yeah, community is growing indeed. Thank you, Micha. We'll continue with Bram, cool, of course. So give a big applause for Bram in that sense. You can share.
Thank you.
And then go ahead.
I hope the presentation is working.
Yes, the presentation is working. I can see it.
Perfect.
Nice.
Let's put it on private view. Thanks so much for your talk as well. Welcome. Before I start my session, let's first do a short introduction. My name is Bram van de Kerkhof. I'm a subject matter expert in DevSecOps. It just means that I know a lot of stuff about security in DevOps. I have a background as an ethical hacker, so more of the attacking side of stuff, so trying to penetrate an application and finding vulnerabilities in environments, which was fun to do, but I noticed that I really wanted to focus on helping developers and teams improve their security, which was sometimes a bit difficult because as an ethical hacker, you find something, but you can't, you can give some advice, but you're not all the way there to improve it. A bit about my hobbies. I like to watch Formula 1 with a friend of mine, which is always fun to talk a bit about life while Formula 1 cars are driving by. And in my free time, I like to visit castles and cook food and eat it as well. This session will not go that much into depth about certain topics. So if you ever want to hear more about it, I also added a LinkedIn and you can always contact me. So I'm going to talk a bit about DevSecOps today, which is also in the title, and how front-end fits into it, and where it really is important to think about security from a front-end perspective. So if you talk about DevOps, and then I took this kind of quote from AWS, but DevOps is a set of practice that combines software development, so development, and IT operations. So operations to enable faster and more reliable software delivery with a focus on collaboration, automation, and continuous improvement. A lot of words, but it really means that the team is responsible for the entire application, building the application, but also hosting and keeping it up to date. And from a security perspective, you see that a lot of trouble comes from the collaboration, automation, and continuous improvement. Because if you look at security and where it fits in, it's almost everywhere, but from old school security, you see that it's more from a governance perspective. So they created, based on compliancy, they created a list of what the requirements of applications. Then when an application is built, then they focus a lot on making sure that the teams get those requirements and then they have to implement. And with DevOps, because the teams are responsible from their own stack, you see that it's quite difficult for security to integrate correctly at companies. What we do mostly when we look more at DevSecOps is we first take those governance. So what are the requirements? What is the company wanting? Wants a company, and we try to translate it to how can we approach teams and give them the tools to start implementing it themselves. And we do this based on the OWASP SOM model, which is created by the same team that created the OWASP Top 10. I think a lot of you know it. It's the top 10 most occurring vulnerabilities or impactful vulnerabilities. And the first thing that we look at is design. So shift left is mostly called. And it's thinking about security early in the process. So when we are designing an application, new function, we try to take security into account. And then we are going to think about the implementation, and that is mostly if I change something in my code, it goes to a build street, a pipeline, and then every security check should be automated. So when we do this continuous improvement, we can actually integrate it into our process and make security quick and not an assessment, evidence-based assessment. And verification, this is more of your old school pen testing to make sure that logic flaws that are missed during the design phase are still picked up, to make sure that something that you do release to production is safe. And the last one, operation, is when you actually run it, that you make sure that if the application doesn't get worked on again, that it's still up to date, the vulnerabilities are patched. OWASP itself goes into more details, but this is just a general feeling on how we try to approach security from a more DevOps side of things. And from security team, we mostly help the squads by integrating it into their process. So this is more DevOps. If we look at front end, I took 4 points where we see that front end is really important, that front end also works on security. And the first one is the mindset of the team, something that is really important, of course. If everyone in the team focuses on security and tries to implement security, it makes it a lot easier to create a secure application. And this is for everyone, like at POs needs to reserve time to do security research, a developer, when he starts working on it, you think about security. But a great example I heard today is that one of our colleagues did a finding that the application didn't have CSP headers, which can normally easily be fixed by implementing, of course, these headers. But the front end, they did everything in line, which is not allowed by these headers. So that meant that if they wanted to introduce those, they had to rewrite the entire application. So because they didn't communicate early in the process about we want to introduce these headers, and front-end should help us with that. Front-end created something that is not as secure as an application can be. So this is also where the mindset of the team really comes back and is really important. It gives me a nice bridge to security headers as well, only it's a different view. What we see with serverless applications and cloud-enabled applications is that headers is also more responsibility of front-end, not only back-end, which it used to be in the past. So it's a more realistic scenario that front-end is setting headers, of course. And then the question is, what is so important about these headers? And to demonstrate this, I want to give you an example. But before we do that, a small disclaimer. This is a write-up of a hack, which is illegal. So if you want to try hacking at home, try to use bug bounty initiatives or open source projects such as OWASP Shop, which are vulnerable applications. So what we're going to do today is we're going to get 3 YouTube subscribers. And it's based on a write-up that was created by the link you see here. What he noticed is that an iframe was loaded into the it was possible to load an iframe from a YouTube video. So this allows someone to embed a YouTube video into their web application. And what he also noticed was that the way you subscribe to a video is through going to Google, for example, in this case, hovering over the icon and then pressing the subscribe button, as you can see here. So this information he combined to create a so-called click-checking attack. And here you can see the background video, but later in the video you will see that he upped the transparency so you can see it. But it's a very simple demo in this case, but he created a game on which you have to follow the red line, and when it becomes green, you have to click. And as you can see here, in the background, you are clicking on the subscribe button. So this means that if someone plays this game, you subscribe to this channel, which is not that big of a deal. But I did some findings in the past where click checking was possible, for example, on an admin page. And if you do something like this, you let the user play a game or click somewhere, and normally there's a, I don't know, delete object button or create user button. It allows you to interact with the user and then perform certain actions. So I also added the video so you can see. Oh, let's play it again. So here you can see he's not subscribed to the application, or not the application, to the YouTube channel. It's red. And when someone goes to his website, as you can see here, you don't see a YouTube video, but you see the red line, which he follows, and then he presses the green. But in the background, what happens is the transparency thing. And sadly, YouTube blocks the video, but if you full screen it, you could see that he's now subscribed. So this is kind of a fun example of what this kind of attack can do. And you can easily prevent it by adding a CSP header in this case, which can be done through a meta tag if it's from the front-end perspective or on the back-end. So hopefully an example of what headers can add to the table. So this is also an example where we see that front-end is becoming more important, as serverless applications don't always allow headers from a server side. Then we have third-party dependency, and this was kind of fun to research. Of course, I don't work that much with NPM, but I started Googling, are there any NPM issues? And this is like 5 minutes of work. It's really quite bad. Most of the time what happens is that NPM packages are created, they are maintained, but they are used by companies, and then someone else gets access to an NPM package and does some malicious things. One great example is more from a hacktivism kind of thing, is the library color.js and faker.js, and it was used to generate fancy colors and generate data for debugging. And when I don't know his name, but the owner of or the creator of WikiLeaks was arrested, I think it was. This person wanted to protest it by injecting code into the NPM package that added a lot of liberty kind of text and crashed the application if you used it. The only downside was that nearly 2.5 million people used the colors.js, I think, or the faker.js, and more than 22 million people use the color.js. So this really impacted a lot of people because they downloaded this package. So this is more an importance of change management, but we also see it from getting packages up to date. So trying to not updating your NPM packages, but introduces vulnerabilities that can lead to attacks by users on your application. So it's something important to take into account when you are creating applications to keep your package up to date, but also to perform change management to make sure that it becomes secure.
Everybody can check their NPM.
It's one attack I really want to do, but to me it's amazing that you create an application NPM package and you make it like work and everyone uses it, and then you suddenly think, I'm going to be evil today, and you change the NPM package to introduce malware. It's like,
be careful what you use.
I still think it's genius, but
Bad consequences.
Don't do it at home. And the last one I wrote down where I see front end, of course, very important, is input validation, of course. I think this is the most thought of in the OS 10 as well. Cross-site scripting is a very known one. But also when we talk about input validation, a tech I like really well, and it came up in your talk as well, is the, not in Blazor, but the template, how it's created. So the 2 brackets, then you do your input, and then you add another 2 brackets. And an attack which you can do is called template injection. And there you send input to an application, for example, bracket 3 times 3, bracket, and you hope that 9 comes back, so the number 9. Because then the server is processing the information. This is a bit iffy because you can see a bill like backend, but I do think that there again it's good to work together with backend frontend to prevent this kind of stuff, because frontend is also really working with these templates. It's one of my to go a bit off topic, but it's one of the most fun findings I almost had, is that you have a tool called Burp Suite, which you use to scan or to intercept traffic. Then you try to inject code, and then you send it to a server. And it told me that template injection was possible. And so I looked what happened, and apparently it tried to inject, I don't know, random number 3678 times 8972. And then it looked if the response would be a large number, which would be the result of those two numbers. But apparently on this website somewhere was an SVG image, which has this random number in the image. So it was a false positive, sadly. But I do think this input validation is something you should look out for when you're doing front end, especially with cross-site scripting, because it can have consequences. You saw in the past when Anonymous was a bit more popular, they used cross-site scripting or SQL injection to deface a website, in which case you overrode the JavaScript of a website to show the page that you wanted. But you also, I don't know if it was an airline or something like that, but they injected crypto miners using these kind of injections to make sure, yeah, so if you visited that website, it tried to mine crypto, which through JavaScript is not that much, but if you do with enough users, it gives you money. And one last great example of why cross-site scripting and stuff like that can be a real problem is you can bypass certain other security principles. So you have the so-called CSRF attack, in which if you submit a form, so let's say I want to submit my personal information and I want to, I don't know, subscribe to a newsletter or something. When I click submit, and what normally happens is your cookies are sent as well, so information about your session. And to prevent other websites from also being able to do this, because Chrome will always send these cookies to a website, no matter which is the origin source. So I can rebuild your form, then call your own website, and then it will try to submit there. You can prevent this by adding a so-called CSRF token. So it's also sent in the request, and if those don't match, then the request will be blocked. But if I'm able to inject JavaScript code on your website, I can read that token, which I can then use to do that submit. So I bypass the original security mechanism, which have led in the past to fun exploits. But sadly, I can't tell about those. But that is also a fun example where you see that front end is really important, that you think about these things. So my finishing thoughts, when I thought about, because it was fun for me as well to think about where does front end come in, where does front end really put security, be security minded, because most of the time backend is more mentioned. It's also saying like you should do security on the backend, not on the front end, which to a certain extent is of course true. But I do think that these things that I came up with are still important and more belong with front end. So to finish it off, I think security is a responsibility for everyone. I really believe this. I think if your business analyst doesn't care about security, it won't come into the requirements, which means as a team you won't care. Same goes for product owners, same goes for a backend. I once had a discussion with a backender which said, if I have to do security, that is then security is done for, which is still to me to this day one of the most ridiculous thing I have ever heard. But it is still a mindset that a lot of people have. So if you have this mindset, please ping me. I will try to discuss it with you and hopefully convince you that security is also your job. With serverless applications, we also see that front-end is becoming more important. So we can't fix everything on the back-end with headers, which is why front-end should also think about these things. But also the example I gave, if we introduce headers that disable the working of the application, that's not beneficial to all. And I think the last one, and I didn't really mention this in my points, but I do think that this one is also important, is security is annoying as hell. We all hate multi-factor authentication. We have to take our mobile, we have to fill it in, and frontend really can help this. You know how users think, you know how to design a good UI. And if I look, for example, if I log into my Google nowadays, I just have to take my phone, scan a QR code, use my fingerprint, and I'm logged in. It works, it's clean, and it's secure. Only you see a lot of front-end designed applications which are not, which are annoying to do. So people think of bypassing this kind of stuff. The same with passwords requirement. If it's not done correctly, it feels like a hassle. But if you create a front end which makes it fun to the user or helps the user in creating correct password, it makes the quirkiness of security less worse. So hopefully, as a front ender, you take this seriously and help people in this way as well. So I did it in 20 minutes. It was a lot of information, but if you have any questions, please let me know.
Oh, well done, Bram. Nice. I think there's enough work for us indeed as front enders to enhance the user experience. And there's also always a saying, like, if you bump up security, then the user experience goes a bit down. Then maybe we can align it a bit more in that sense.
Yeah.
There are no questions in the chat, but indeed a small reminder: take security into account.
Yeah, very important. And perhaps one thing, or then I have 1 minute left. A great example of what a thing I also heard was a talk on the user is not the weakest link. And they gave us example, and I think that is what Frontend also gave in. When you look at emails, you have PGP, which nobody uses because it's annoying. Perhaps the more developers and the security-minded people will use it, but your GAM model or your model won't use it. But they did around the same thing with WhatsApp, and everyone uses it just by making it a bit more easier, maybe a bit less secure, but that is sometimes more secure than not doing it at all. So that's perhaps also a great example of what you can do.
Very good example indeed. Is there any advice you can give to front-enders to making sure that your product owner or BIA will have to focus actually on security as well? Because usually they're not the technical people. How can we make sure that there's like some room for that?
My tip will be, and I've seen this so much in the past, that they will write down, so they will know that something is not secure, but they will approach it from a technical view. So they will say, yeah, it's not secure, and we should implement a vault to do secure secrets, something like that. And then the PO will look at it, think that is not functionality, go away. So
that doesn't help the user.
So what I try to do if I see these kind of things, I try to approach it a bit more from a functionality perspective. So you can say something like, to give the user a safe feeling, we have to incorporate secrets in a correct manner, and this can really help with convincing a PO, which is more from a functionality perspective. And make sure also what the impact is. So I once had this I worked at a company, and I gave the advice to do something with secret as well. And the developers told me, yeah, we told them 2 years ago. And I was like, okay, that is not something is going wrong here. Yeah. And then I told them to management, yeah, they told 2 years ago that secret management should be improved. And they laughed already. Apparently, they just created a Jira ticket which said secret management. And then management should react like, oh, we should definitely fix it. So this is something, this is how you approach and how you bring it to less technical people.
And I see there's also an option to just hack the product out.
Yeah.
Nice. There's one other question from Leo. Again, nice questions, Leo. Very good. Does the automatic subscribing require any interaction or verification of the website visitor beside loading the page, or did I miss something? I think it's about the YouTube video.
Yeah. So what you can do is you load an iframe. So iframe is an element which allows you to load an external website into your own website. And that is everything. If you don't block it, every website can do this. Most websites block it. So that is how you approach it. You just load an external website into your website. And if it's not blocked by the external website, then the user can do nothing to prevent it, except for perhaps installing a plugin. But I don't think that any people, except from security, probably have it.
I guess so, indeed. Thank you, Bram.
Thank you
Nice
as well.
presentation. Well, we'll continue with the awesome presentations actually, because Jordy jumped right now talking about CDN. I'm very interested in this one. Jordy gave a small sneak preview of.
He gave me the perfect bridge.
Yeah, perfect bridge
exactly.
indeed. Big applause for you, Jordy. You can share the screen.
Yes. Welcome all. Micha gave me the perfect bridge. Because he talked about how web applications, well, it's especially like Blazor or Angular or any of the new WebAssembly applications, they take a lot of time to initially load. And I think that issue becomes even more apparent when you distribute your applications worldwide, right? So that's what I want to talk about, how to prevent that and how to enhance the performance using Azure CDN. Yes, okay. So what to expect from this presentation? Well, of course, I'm going to give a demo because everyone likes demos. So I'm going to start with a simple web app and show you guys how to improve the load times of that app. But first, I want to do a little introduction, which I'm doing right now. Some understanding of what a CDN is. So I'm very curious if even anyone knows what a CDN is. Maybe everyone knows, maybe nobody does. So definitely let us know in the chat. A small introduction what Azure CDN means, Azure Front or Azure CDN, whatever you want to call it. And then some hands-on, and of course, finishing it off with a conclusion. So let's start off with a small introduction of myself. I'm Jordy Verlaek, 28 years. Been here at Solidity for 4 years now. Been at several customers, currently at Canon, production printing, where we indeed also use Blazor. And I have a QR code to my LinkedIn page if you want to ask me any questions or connect after. So definitely do that. Okay, so what is a CDN or a content delivery network? Let's start with the problem first. Like we talked about, especially those WebAssembly applications that take a lot of time to initially load. And let's say we have a small company that has created a web application and rolled that out to Europe. All of their customers are from Europe, so it's fine, right? It's the loading times are fine. But then, of course, like every company, they grow and the customers, they become, instead of Europe, they become worldwide, right? So then you get these problems. The initial load time of those WebAssembly applications are already not great. But if you spread them worldwide and all of these users first have to go to the origin server in Europe, that's just going to take a lot more time. And what does that mean? Users don't like waiting, so that means unhappy users. So what do? CDN introduces something called edge servers, and those are like spread worldwide, and they act as a in-between server for the users. So what they do is, let's say I have a user in America, and that user is requesting my web page. Then, for example, Azure knows, okay, it's connected to the CDN, and it will look up the assets for that web application. If they are there, they will serve them to the user, and if they're not there, they will first go to the origin server, get those files, and then serve them to the user. And after that, every request will come directly from the edge server. So instead of having to go all across the globe, they can get the files from the edge server. And of course, that means no more slow connections and hopefully happy.
Hopefully people will stay on your website indeed.
Exactly. It's not only about performance, it's also about security and availability. Security, I'm talking about, I'm guessing Bram likes that. Because a CDN is spread worldwide. It improves your capability to deal with, for example, DDoS attacks, because the CDN automatically knows how to load balance and also prevent DDoS attacks. And it also, because it is widely spread, it has to do with the availability of your website. It is smart enough to, let's say I have a edge server in West America, that edge server goes down. It is smart enough to actually understand, okay, is there maybe another edge server closer? So it will go to East US instead of saying, okay, no, I need to go to the origin server. It always tries to pick the closest server possible, which of course improves your availability of your application.
That's pretty much also the concept of Azure CDN. It adds a couple of benefits like improved access control. Of course, you have integration with all of the app services, all of the services that Azure already provides. And in my opinion, it's very easy to customize. We'll get a bit more into the caching rules, that kind of stuff, when we do the demo, but that's pretty much the gist of it. So, like I said, I'm going to give a demo. So the starting point is I've created a small web application found somewhere on GitHub with a lot of assets, images, JavaScript files, that kind of stuff that normally takes quite a while to load initially. It's an Angular app, so I personally like Angular more. You know.
Hopefully there's no color or faker yes in your.
No. Well, no, I don't think so. So let me go to my resource group that is empty. And I will start with creating a storage account. Because I want to host my app somewhere, and therefore I need a storage account in this case.
Yeah, maybe it's nice for the people who haven't never seen Microsoft Azure.
This is Microsoft Azure.
Yeah, I can imagine some people haven't worked with it.
No, indeed.
But it's fluid for you.
Yeah, it's of course the cloud environment of Microsoft.
Yes.
So let's set it up like this. I just gave it a name, and the important part you want to see here is I selected the west of the United States here. Normally, you would want this location to be as close to your users, but because I want to simulate me having to go to an application that's far away from me, I chose the west of the United States here, and yeah, that's quite far away. So let's review that creation. All of those other settings are not important for now. Yes, it likes it, and now I'm going to create that storage account. And the storage account is pretty much a place where I can put the files from my web app and host them from there. So that's what I'm going to do now. Takes a little bit to deploy, but maybe there are any questions already?
No questions yet in the chat,
Okay.
but this is also helpful for people who use 3G, for instance, or isn't that really that useful for them?
Sorry,
for 3G, 4G?
Yeah, exactly. The less latency you have, the better, right? And of course, 3G, 4G introduces extra latency, and it will have to travel less far. So it's definitely going to improve those slow times too. Okay, so it created my resource, and I am now going to go to a static website, like Micha already mentioned. And then it takes a while sometimes.
Especially with the demo.
It knows. I'm sharing my screen. So. Good thing I have a backup for that. So I'm going to show the creation process in another group. Call it slow. So what I did is I went here and I enabled the static website, and I put the files from my application. So that that Angular app, I put that inside of this folder. So you can see, right, this is hopefully familiar with most front-end developers. You have your assets. There's some images here that's going to need to load, and all of these files here, they need to be downloaded to the client before they can actually use them. So all of these items are going to add extra latency on the first load. And that's what we want to prevent, right? So let me go back. And let's load this website.
There's also almost a small portfolio demo, how to launch your own portfolio with the static hosting.
Okay. So like we can see now, we hosted the website on our Azure storage, and we can see now I'm going to do some refreshes. I can see it takes quite a while to load actually. I think most users would think,
Bye.
Yeah, exactly. So you can see, okay, it loads, but it takes around 2.8, 2.7 seconds to load the whole app. In my opinion, that's quite long. So let's see how we can improve that, right? So we go back to Azure. and we will introduce something that is called a CDN. So I'm going to go to demo. I'm going to create the CDN. Like this. I'm gonna, for the demo's sake, I'm gonna quick create one. So what it is asking me now, of course, again, it needs a name. So we'll call it the CDN Frontend Lightning Talks demo. Right, easy enough. And it's of course also wants to have an endpoint name, because that CDN also needs to be available under some kind of URL. Of course, Azure also has the availability to put a custom domain, that kind of stuff. I'm not going to go into that for now, but of course you don't have to have, let's see what it's going to create. Yeah, your customers are not going to have to be name -e2emhf. It's not going to be configured. I'm going to have to give it an origin type, and that's kind of saying, okay, I am the content delivery network. Where is my content going to come from? What type? And in this case, we created a storage account, but you can see there's a lot of different possibilities here, right? You got app services, you got API management gateways, that kind of stuff. But in this case, we want the static website. And then we can select that one under here. So we created this one, and that's going to redirect it to that storage account we just created. Of course, you want to enable caching because that's the whole point of a CDN. For now, we're going to do ignore query string and enable compression. And compression is also something really cool. Let's say you have images on your website that are not really optimized for web applications. The CDN can actually automatically convert those images to, for example, I think it's, for example, WebP or at least way more optimal files to be used in web browsers automatically. So you don't have to use them yourselves, but it can automatically be converted to those kind of formats, which again are a lot faster for load times. So let's recreate. And this is also going to take some time, so I'm going to go back to my previously created one. I'm going to cheat a little bit. Of course, this is something that has to be rolled out worldwide, so it's not something that, yeah. Unfortunately, it's not a one-click thing, and that's going to immediately work. But it definitely beats having to go all around the globe and deploy servers. So,
by bike or by
okay, so this is one I already created, and it creates an endpoint, which in this case is the new gateway for users to go through. You have security policies, which I didn't set, so Bram, please don't.
I will forget you.
One time.
And we have the route, which tells the endpoint where to actually reroute the traffic to. Let's see. I'm going to copy this to my clipboard. No, that's not actually copying Azure. I will click it multiple times. See, okay, so this is the new URL. You can see it has the .azure FD, which stands for Azure Front Door, which is another naming scheme Microsoft uses to say CDN. And as you can see, this is exactly the same website. But the difference is, if I look at my load times now, remember the other website that had like say 2 to 3 seconds load times? Well, this is definitely a lot better in this case.
It's visually better as well.
Yeah, like if you load this website now, yeah, it's there, right? So that's what a CDN does. You see the initial load the first time, of course, will be a little bit longer because it still has to go to that origin server. And as soon as you have that, it will go to that edge server the closest it can, and it will provide you the content. And it will do that, for example, this is the main JavaScript file I filtered on now, but it will do that same thing with images, for example. Let's say the user.png compared to the one here. Well, 600 milliseconds, 1.10 seconds compared to 51 to 100. That's quite a big difference for the users. So it can help you with all that static content and actually delivering it faster to your user. How are we on time?
Oh, great.
Yeah.
But,
Okay.
unless you're going to present 10 more minutes. Then,
No, because then I really want to tell you something more about the rule sets, because that's actually the really cool bit. Because you have to think for your users, you shouldn't cache everything, because it's still about the user experience. And caching can also introduce a lot of frustrations for users. Because let's say a user changes his profile picture, right? Well, I changed my profile picture, but why is it not changing? That's because it probably has gotten cached by the CDN. Well, of course, there are something that is called a rule set, and there you can set rules for when not to cache, for example. So that's what we're going to do now. So I'm going to do a very simple example. I'm going to say I want to ignore the caching on mobile devices. That's something that's very easily doable in Azure. So I'm going to give it a name, and I'm going to add a condition. You have a lot of different types, and in this case, you can ask Azure, okay, can you tell me when a mobile device is doing a request? I'll do that, and I will say, okay, is the request equal to a mobile device? Okay. We will add an action, and we will say caching is disabled for that request. We will save that. This should be a little bit faster this time.
And then the estimate demo effect.
Yeah, maybe in the meantime, there's already a question in the chat from yours. Can Azure CDN also be used for non-Azure data sources? I'm
not 100% sure. I don't think so. I think it is verified. Verified. It is bound to those Azure resources. I'm saying that you could indirectly, of course, do it, because you can also connect your Azure environments to on-premise, for example, and then put the CDN in front of that. But I think it's mainly in combination with Azure resources. But there is also a lot of other providers that provide CDNs that can do that for you. But if I'm wrong, definitely let me know.
There are some more questions. So during the loading,
yeah,
I will fire away. In that case. I think Microsoft Azure maybe needs to.
Oh, no, it actually created it, but it didn't tell me. Okay. Okay, it created it. Okay, so it created the rule set, but it tells me, okay, it's not associated to the route job. That means is I have that endpoint created previously, but I didn't apply the rule set to that endpoint yet. So I'm going to do that. Yes. It's the time.
Everything is slow today.
Yeah, it's.
You have maximum 5 minutes over your presentation, so will be okay.
I think so. Did it do it? It is doing it. I think
it's already amazing to see that the difference is insane and just noticeable. I think that's most importantly noticeable for the user as well. And there are use cases for big companies that have users around the world. There's Australia. I think there's less connectivity there.
I think the bigger the company, maybe the most benefit even. Because you have to realize this is a very small application, right? Yeah. This is like a very simple demo app that has a small, base of JavaScript code, for example. But the bigger your application gets, the more benefit you will get from using CDN. Okay, I think Azure told me it finished, so let's see. So what we're going to do now is I'm going to refresh. Okay, we will see. Okay, so you see the initial load takes 700 milliseconds, then it goes back to the cached asset. But this is on a desktop. I told Azure, listen, if it's a mobile device, don't cache. So if I change here now and emulate a mobile device, I refresh, you will see that it takes longer. Because I told Azure specifically, listen, don't do anything with caching when it's a mobile device. And you can customize it in that way that it's for certain files, for certain request headers, all that kind of stuff. Too much to go into detail for this demo, but it's really cool. Just for the demo, so let's go back to the slides. Yeah, a small performance test I did with a couple of requests. As you can again see the big difference here. I did a Google PageSpeed Insights. If anybody knows that, it's a very cool website where you can give in the URL of your website and it will give you an index on performance, accessibility, best practices, that kind of stuff. And it will also tell you, listen, your files are not minified, your images are not compressed the right way. And you can see here, combining it with Azure CDN, it gives you a very good performance score compared to what it was previously. So I think it does it very well. Some small best practices, if we haven't gone through everything already. I would not recommend putting dev environments behind CDNs because it can get frustrating because you're working with caching and a dev environment is normally something that changes a lot. Yeah, like I said, minifying JavaScript, CSS. If the CDN doesn't do it for you, make sure that you do it as a front-end developer. Query caching rules we went over. And yeah, again, it's not always about speed, but also mainly about the user experience. So make sure to know the business rules behind caching and what to actually cache. Instead of just saying, okay, everything from mobile needs to be cached. Don't do what I just did. Conclusion, Azure CDN is a very powerful content delivery network by Microsoft. We saw that it really reduces the page load times and thus also the user experience. And we've gone through a quick setup on how to set it up. It was very quick and very minimal, but definitely send me a message if you want to know more about them. I have some resources behind this QR code. This is going to show in any minute.
Hey.
I'll leave it a little bit for everyone to take your phone out, but I'll also share them in the chat, so don't worry. And are there any more questions?
Nice, well done, Jordy. There are indeed a few questions for you.
One.
Cool demo is a compliment, first of all. I can imagine that a localized service minimizes the power usage of serving apps towards clients. Does this help making the hosting more sustainable?
Yeah, definitely. So I think, and that's also a lot of people, or maybe in the infrastructure would say, well, why would I need to do this, right? I would just deploy my servers everywhere and not have ever in the application everywhere, right? And it will indeed cost more because you're running the actual applications. What you're doing here is you're still running the core of the application itself in this one server, and you're just copying the assets to, well, around the world. So I think that will definitely help. Yes.
Nice, bit of holistic approach to IT. Maybe that's a presentation in Slovenia as well. Another question from Laurens. When and how will the Edge server check if there are updates on the origin? In other words, how can the cache be updated? Yes,
okay, there is a lot of ways, luckily, that you can say, okay, purge the cache Azure, for example. There are ways that you, for example, if you deploy a new version to dev, that you can purge it. Purging, of course, means emptying the cache. But there's also a lot of policies, right? You can customize it yourself when the cache gets emptied, when to actually fill the cache. So you have total control over that. Luckily. Yeah.
That's good to know. And Leo asks, am I able to specify the area where the CDN needs to work, for example, Western Europe and the US, or is the optimization in Azure more general and will enhance the access speed everywhere?
That's a good question. I don't have actually experience with that one, so I will have to look into that.
Dig into it.
Yeah.
Come back with a question.
But yeah, you can do a lot of with the headers and the request itself, and you can see what that request is from. So you could say, okay, if my request is from, let's say it's United States, don't cache. That's probably a possibility. Yes.
Nice. Okay, great.
Yes.
Perhaps you also see benefits of using an Azure CDN over, for example, a Cloudflare or probably AWS for support. But let's say, for example, Cloudflare, are there benefits using Azure CDN?
I think it's the whole, again, the whole Microsoft ecosystem you're in then, and it connects very well with all the app services and all the services you have on Azure. I think that's the main benefit over using CDN. I think most of the CDNs, they do the same thing. I think
depends on what your company also uses.
Then
you start using Microsoft.
Yeah, but perhaps there's a feature in Azure that Cloudflare, for example, does not. Yeah, you never know.
Nice.
Thank you.
Question. Okay, let's continue. Because we made it till the end. Congratulations. For me personally, I really liked all the different sessions. I'm a front-ender by day and by night as well. But looking at the cloud and security, it's surely interesting. I think I learned something. I can use it tomorrow. Saying to the team, hey, security, what do we think about it? Do we actually use it? And also, of course, the Blazor. That's pretty cool. And the CDN as well. Well, those are the three things we talked about. As you see, a bit out of time, so I'll speed up. We have a small giveaway for Romania, the conference, since we're a community partner as well. The question is, how many events has our meetup group organized? So if you're very smart, you quickly go to meetup.com and count the events. You can put the answer in the chat or send them to me via LinkedIn or the meetup comments as well. We will give a few tickets away completely for free. It's in the Netherlands, based in Utrecht. So if you cannot make it, then you can answer, but your ticket is not so useful in that sense. So please think about it, and then you will receive the reward. Contact us via Meetup or LinkedIn, and in the chat as well. Then we can send out some names. Well, in general, if you use this code, so is the Frontend community, then you will get 25% off. We will send the link of Romania in a few seconds in the chat. But we're looking at our own meetup as well, because that's where our heart is in that sense. In 2023 and 2024, well, we are looking at this year as a quite busy year again, but with lots of different topics actually. Innovation in tech, also some AI and front-end, and now weird, again, different subjects, cloud and security. So this year was all about connecting with other communities, connecting about different expertises in that sense. But we need you as well. For next year, we want to do some awesome sessions again. I saw React is probably high on the list, looking at all the numbers. But we need you. If you think about, hey, I want to present, it's also possible because it's for internal and externals. But without further ado, I'm glad that you were here. Big applause for the presenters. And that's it. So well done, guys. I really loved it.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, and we will see you at the next Lightning Talks. This week the recording will also be live on the YouTube. And have a great evening, guys.